Chapter 17. A Glimpse into the Past. Calysta sat up. The world around her wasn't the living room she had fallen asleep in after a night of bittersweet talks with her boys, but rather a dark expanse with a stone, deteriorated surface. Taking a handful of overly loud steps, she daunted there was an end to the place in which she resided. She wondered if this place was like Avalon, a place her soul had slipped into during her rest.
You're still dwelling within your body, but your mind is lingering within the domain of our bond.
Cali's voice rang out through the darkness as the familiar orange-gold flames glimmered to life and formed into a massive bird. As Cali made her appearance, the world was illuminated in a bright flash that made Calysta instinctively shut her eyes. "So, I'm dreaming?" Calysta asked as she opened her eyes once more. The world around her was made of ruined stonework, ancient-looking trees and other flora, along with more modern-looking features, all swirled together in a contradictory tapestry of two people's minds.
In a sense, I felt there was a conversation to be had.
Calysta felt the ripples of Cali's emotions echo throughout the world. Grief, fear, and regret, all in equal measure. Usually, Calysta felt the feelings move from Cali through their bond and into her own mind. But here, the transfer of information was instantaneous, a level of emotional closeness that even with the fantastical events in her life, she could have never imagined having with someone else. Calysta was honored that Cali would share such an intimate place with her, a palace where neither of them could lie, a place of unconditional honesty. "All right, Excalibur. Whatever you want," Calysta said, looking at her companion, giving her a grin.
I know you're not going to falter in your goal of stopping Mordred, knowing that I have tales that might be useful to you.
As Cali spoke, the ripples of remorse and worry. "Makes sense. You were probably there." Calysta with a nod.
Clarence and I both, though my knowledge is still limited,
Calysta said, as a white fog washed over the patchwork landscape around them. When the fog dispersed, she was standing in a magnificent room of banners and fine statues, the empty room only furnished by a giant circular table, and the chairs sat around it like jewels upon a crown. Men of all shapes and sizes sat at the table, with a blonde at its head, Arthur Pendragon himself. Behind Arthur was a man adorned in several layers of robes. The man had white hair and shared the same pointed ears as Virden. "Is that Merlin?" The question was quickly answered by an echo of confirmation that flowed seamlessly through the memory. Callista's eyes were drawn to an empty seat. A look around showed that all the others at the table were also watching the absentee's seat, an overwhelmingly pregnant silence blanketing the memory. The expectant silence turned into a stressful tension as a dark-haired woman walked in with a dark-haired boy around Clover's age. The boy was clad in a black armor she was sure Clover would adore, and the same golden eyes as Arthur. Calysta felt an intense anxiety from Cali as everyone watched the boy. He seemed impatient, bouncing his leg as she sat in the empty chair.
"Thank you, Morgan,"
Arthur said in an annoyed voice that sounded like the verbal equivalent of warm sand on one's feet, a handsome sound that matched Arthur's appearance.
"Of course, Artie,"
Morgan said with a snide sneer that could only be an extremely subdued loathing.
"Be good, Mordred. Don't embarrass your father too much,"
Morgan said, before leaving through a set of double doors, leaving only the quieted mumblings of the knights around as the apparent revelation overcame the crowd. Was this when they found out that Mordred was Arthur's son? Calysta asked.
It wasn't something we had thought could happen. She made advances on him in the past, but he always denied her.
Cali explained, as the memory froze around them. That's not what the legends say. Calysta said.
They are wrong. Mordred was artificially made with dark magic and some DNA Morgan had found, but the flaws in his creation soon became clear.
The scene changed as the same fog rolled in, erasing the room, and when it lifted, the world had changed to be an expansive battlefield's aftermath. The battle had long since ended, and a band of a few enemy soldiers now knelt, begging for their lives against Arthur's forces. Some faces among Arthur's army Calysta could place from the previous memory, but many either lacked detail or weren't faces she recognized. Mordred took a step forward, sword drawn to vanquish the men, but Arthur's hand on his shoulder prevented any further violence.
Mordred was temperamental. Morgan laced his creation with a spell that intensified his bloodlust, and it grew every day. Needless to say, their ideals didn't see eye to eye.
Mordred pulled his father aside, fury in his eyes.
Why spare them? They were your enemies. They killed our men, and you allow them to still draw breath? Why?
Mordred demanded.
As most of our conquered lands once did.
Arthur countered, pulling away from Mordred's grasp.
The other knights are starting to think you're soft. You ignore dishonor in your court and spare the wicked. No wonder your people are losing faith in you.
Scorn filled Mordred's eyes as his voice raised.
Some of those very knights are those I've spared after the smog of war had ended.
Arthur said calmly, gently placing a hand on Mordred's shoulder.
Son, just because someone is your enemy doesn't mean they have to be vanquished. Once the battle is over, it is over.
Arthur continued. Mordred's expression was one of unfathomable confusion. Confusion at the thought of sparing the lives of those you faced upon the field of battle.
If that is what you want, my king,
Mordred mumbled with a sigh.
After that, Mordred briefly became better. He tried controlling himself, defied his nature so extensively that Arthur started considering him for the throne. In this time, their relationship as father and son flourished.
Cali said as the scene froze, the eerie feeling of all those around her stopping mid-breath, lifelessly staring out at whatever they happened to be glancing at. Arthur's gaze still focused on Mordred, full of fatherly compassion. Then I don't see why we have to fight him. If we can talk to him, we can come to an understanding, Calysta said. If Arthur was able to show such mercy, she had no right to take lives for the sake of it.
It doesn't end there, Calysta. Not all stories have happy endings.
The fog again engulfed the world around Calysta, leaving her annoyed and still wondering if she could solve the Mordred problem without taking a life. Calysta watched as the world altered itself around them, as the fog receded once more. A large round room of stone and lumber greeted her, furnished like an office or study. Morgan sat at the desk. A black staff leaned against the wall nearby, and all was calm until Arthur burst into the room, face covered in gore and anger, Mordred following close behind him.
Welcome to my study, Artie,
Morgan said casually, not taking her eyes off the papers she was examining.
You are under arrest,
Arthur announced, a statement which brought about no reaction from Morgan at all. A few tense moments passed before Morgan looked away from her paperwork, gifting Arthur her gaze of amusement.
I'm under arrest for what, exactly?
Morgan said with an air of smug sarcasm.
Treason,
Arthur said, pointing Excalibur at her.
A bold claim,
Morgan said, standing from her seat.
You brainwashed my court, all but Merlin and Mordred, attempted to have them kill me, and in the process, Camelot was ravaged.
Arthur said, a growl in his tone.
Mother,
Mordred said pleadingly, as if begging his mother to come quietly rather than causing more harm to those around her.
It's not as if it took much to turn them on you, Artie.
With a wave of her hand, the black staff flew to her hand as a dark mist radiated from her.
You can still come peacefully and accept your punishment, Morgan,
Arthur said, displaying immense patience.
Under what nation's authority?
Morgan said with a sly smirk.
It occurs to me that Camelot has fallen, along with any authority you possess.
Morgan said in an overly loud, challenging tone.
What authority does a man without a military or crown have to govern one who's blessed with magic? Your knights are dead. Your queen has left you cuckolded by your most trusted friend. And everything you have strived for your entire life has been laid to ruin. On top of all of that, you're about to die by your only remaining son's hands.
Morgan said with immense pleasure.
Mother, Father has shown me patience and kindness. I don't want to cause either of you harm.
Mordred said, his fist clenched tightly around the hilt of his sword.
But if I'm forced to act, I will side with the man who showed me kindness, rather than the woman who taught me hatred.
Mordred said, from his expression, blood beginning to drip from his clenched hand.
Did it really take that much restraint to hold himself back?
Calysta asked in awe as she watched Mordred and Morgan stare each other down.
It did. It took countless hours of Arthur and him working out how to control his anger. Where once he would go into a berserk rampage, now he could manage words, albeit with a great amount of struggle.
Cali said, as Morgan took a step towards the duo of men.
Mother, don't take another step forward,
Mordred announced, but his demand was met with Morgan closing more of the distance between them, walking until she stood right before him, gently caressing Mordred's cheek with her free hand.
My dear, sweet little boy, how you've grown,
Morgan said, in a motherly tone so absent of love that it gave Calysta goosebumps.
Big enough to think for yourself, big enough to marry, and big enough to betray me.
The false kindness of Morgan's words transformed into wicked anger. Mordred fell to a knee, holding his head in pain from an invisible attack. There was no blood, no impact, almost as if Morgan's words had caused a migraine to wash over him. Calysta instinctively took a step forward to help Mordred, before realizing this was a memory. In the time it took for Calysta to take that single step, Arthur was already at his son's side.
Mordred, are you all right?
Arthur asked frantically, his eyes full of the same love and compassion Calysta remembered her own father boasting.
Witch, what have you done?
Arthur demanded, sparing Morgan a glare.
I set him right. No need for all this silly empathy nonsense. Not when this is time I could be busy putting the pieces of Camelot back together. With myself as queen,
Morgan said with an evil smile as she took a handful of steps back. A drop of something warm landed on Calysta's arm. Looking up, she realized it was somehow raining in the room. The manifestations of memory around her didn't seem to notice this anomaly, but Calysta felt the warm rain and a feeling of endless sadness that filled the room she now stood in. Calysta knew this memory would be painful to relive. She wondered how many times Cali had run through this series of events since they occurred. Calysta knew such a memory couldn't be fully healed, but she hoped one day she could help to mend some amount of the grief Cali must feel every day from this day. With a wave of her blackened staff, Arthur was sent flying, colliding with the far wall, shackles of the dark mist holding him against it.
That's quite enough. Goodbye, Artie,
Morgan said, as a sphere of dark energy began to swirl and gather around the jewel-adorned silver bat atop her staff, the mass of mist condensing into a small, unstable-looking sphere. Pointing the sphere-tipped staff towards Arthur's direction, Morgan took careful aim, and in a black flash of non-light, a hole was blasted through the wall Arthur was bound to, along with a good portion of Arthur's side, blood gushing from the severe wound. Calysta wondered how Morgan had mostly missed the still-living Arthur, but looking in her direction, she saw Morgan's chest agape, with Mordred's sword through it.
Mordred!
Morgan said in anger, as blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. With a flourish of his blade, Mordred withdrew his sword from his mother's chest, letting her limp body fall to the ground.
Mordred, thank you.
Arthur said, as Morgan's magical restraints dissipated from his limbs, freeing him from the wall. Calysta and Arthur looked to Mordred. This man wasn't the man Calysta had seen before. The troubled man had devolved into a rage-filled beast, most likely due to Morgan's earlier manipulations. Arthur cautiously walked to his son, blood still gushing from his wound. His stride was interrupted, however, by a swing of Mordred's arm, which knocked him out of the hole in the wall Morgan had created earlier. Calysta followed Mordred, who leapt out the hole after Arthur. Upon reaching the opening, she saw a city brought to ruin, a city where gore and flame ruled, a place of sheer desolation. Looking behind her, Calysta saw Merlin, watching with her. The beautiful white-haired man's eyes told of sadness and disappointment, of a story once foretold that would never be, and a lifetime wasted on a fanciful dream. Calysta wished she could pat the man's shoulder, tell him it was all right and that other chances might arise, but she knew that wasn't an option. As Arthur rolled to the left after colliding with the ground below him, narrowing, avoiding Mordred's blade, which sheathed itself into the earth, the force of the strike was so powerful that it shattered the ground below Mordred. The man, who was now little more than a blind beast, lashing out at the ground around him.
Merlin, Morgan did something. She altered his mind. Can we fix him?
Arthur said, standing despite the serious wound in his side, as Clarent manifested in his hands. The sleek black and gold form of Clarent, a smooth form of obsidian, adorned with golden markings and flourishings along its blade and hilt.
Not without harm. In his current health, the magic that was used to birth him is too powerful to manipulate. You must weaken him. Then perhaps I will be able to do something.
Merlin yelled from beside her. Looking into the man's eyes, under the sadness, she saw determination, the same kind Viarden often boasted.
All right, Mordred. Let's do this then,
Arthur said with a sigh, as he held his sword of peace at the ready, the flow of blood from his side slowing. Calysta assumed this was due to Merlin's magic, but she had no idea how he would be able to engage in a fight of this scale, having lost more blood than he probably had left. Mordred ran at Arthur with a speed that Calysta could barely follow with her eyes, and before she knew it, the two men's swords had collided with a sound that sounded like church bells. The force of the impact shattering all the remaining windows in the city and causing several buildings to give out around them. The cloud of dust engulfed the battlefield, and from within, Calysta saw several flashes of gold and red. Each crossing of blade was signaled by another of the bell-like sounds. A crash sounded as the cloud of debris subsided, Arthur being launched from his position and through 3 stone buildings, Mordred following his prey. How did monsters like this actually exist? Calysta asked, watching as Mordred leapt towards Arthur, his sword pointed down towards the king.
Eras long past had many especially capable beings. Some bloodlines were especially gifted, though in Mordred's case, I'm sure the magic used to create him was also a factor.
Cali said, as Arthur skillfully rolled to the side to avoid the strike, swinging Clarent at Mordred as a wave of gold erupted from the blade, sending Mordred through a building. Why wasn't Arthur using you? Calysta asked, watching the two clash once more, a mighty clash that parted the cloudy sky above them.
Clarent is unable to take a life, no matter how devastating the blow he inflicts. Despite his current state, Arthur still didn't want to take his son's life.
Cali's words were cut short as the sky darkened and Mordred's blade sank into Arthur's chest.
Merlin!
Arthur yelled, blood pouring from his mouth.
Of course,
Merlin said, as he sent a cloud of white butterflies at Mordred. The crowd of fairies engulfed Mordred, and when they faded, Mordred fell to his knees.
Mordred,
Arthur said, as he pulled the blade from his body and dragged himself to his son's side, laying him down. He loved his son so much that he didn't even care that he himself was dying. Calysta watched as Merlin appeared by Arthur, kneeling down to the man on his knees.
Did you fix him?
Arthur asked, in a tone so pleading that she wished to answer the man's question.
No. He wasn't weakened enough during your battle to fix Morgan's mind manipulations. However, I have put him to sleep. He will sleep, unaging until I find another way to heal his mind,
Merlin said, taking Arthur in his arms as a father might with his own dying child.
Thank you, Merlin.
Arthur wheezed.
Rest now. You've done more than enough. I will ensure Mordred's safety. Your companions will go to Avalon, and I will never stop seeking a cure for your son,
Merlin said, as tears trickled down his face.
Thank you for all the good years, my old friend,
Arthur said, as his eyes lost their sparkle, and Merlin lost his only remaining friend. Calysta jolted upright from her position on the couch. Tears stained her face, and the sorrow still lingered in her heart like a shadow upon the wall. Thank you for entrusting me with memories so painful for you. They won't go to waste, Calysta said to Excalibur, thankful for her friend's trust in her. Looking out at her boys, she hoped they could all make it out of this without any major complications. She didn't want what came from Arthur's tale. She would have to try with every fiber of her being to avoid her story ending like his. Though she was happy he was happy in the end. Everyone deserved to die with a smile on their face.